Hello, my name is Stuart Baker, the Systems and Institutional Repository Librarian at Western Oregon University. I'm just going to talk today about using a tool called Twine to build interactive content for open educational resources. I'm just going to briefly talk about interactive fiction, Twine, then I'll go into how to use Twine and how to use it specifically in OERs. So interactive fiction is basically a type of video game where you mostly use text. You see there's a more specific definition there from the Interactive Fiction Technology Foundation. And although interactive fiction has been around for a long time and is not quite as popular as it once was, there is a big online community of fans, players, authors, and academics who study interactive fiction. Twine is one example of a authoring tool for interactive fiction. It creates games that run in the web browser and work like web pages. So you can see on this example on the right here, we have some text at the top with a picture, and then there's those 3 links that the player can select to advance the game. You can also use Twine to track variables and add functions in to add more interactivity, but you don't have to. If you want to write in Twine, you have to go to their website, which is down at the bottom there. It's just twinery.org. There is a browser-based editor you can use, and there's also a downloadable editor. Both of them are free. They both have the same functionality. It's just a matter of where they are. Twine is fairly simple to write in, unlike some other interactive fiction authoring tools. The syntax is very similar to the code you use to write on Wikipedia. The editors also include ways to add these functions and variables that don't require you to do the programming. So if you are programming a verse, Twine is a great way to write these interactive web pages, whether they're stories or something else. And you see some of the other things you can do here. You can make those links reveal new text, change existing text, direct the players to a different passage, and so on. This is an example of a passage in Twine. You can see there's some text description there, and then there's these sections that have the brackets around them, like to the west, a field, and this double bracket turns this into a link to a different passage. And then in this case, we have the text that we want to display on the page, which is west, and then an arrow telling the program where to send the player if they click that passage. And down at the bottom here, we also have an if-else statement. So this will alter what text is outputted depending on the value of this clues variable. And here's what that looks like when it's outputted in the browser. It's just a web page. There's text at the top, and then there's those 3 links that you can click to go to those 3 different passages down there at the bottom. So if you are more inclined to do programming or that sort of tinkery stuff, you can definitely do that in Twine. You can edit the JavaScript and the style sheet for your story inside the editor, as you can see in the screenshot on the right. You can also do that just in the actual HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files after the story is outputted, if that's more your thing. And one other thing about Twine is that it has different story formats. And these have sort of different options in them. They change the default output look. They change some of the functions and variable types you can include. There's a bunch of these. Several are included in the client that you use to publish stories, which you can see in the screenshot where it says change story format. But you don't have to mess with any of this if you don't want to. As with anything that's going to be online, you want to keep accessibility in mind. Some of the more complicated Twine functionality may not be accessible, but Twine games can be accessible. And I have heard of people who cannot see writing games in the editor and also being able to play the games. So the bottom line is just to make sure that what you're doing is accessible. You can use the Wave extension tool or whatever other accessibility checker you prefer to determine that. As Twine stories are published as HTML files, you can host them pretty much anywhere that you could host any HTML file. If you don't already have a dedicated website, my recommendation is to try uploading them on itch.io, which is a marketplace for games, including interactive fiction. You don't have to charge people to download it. You can set it to be free. And that way it has a place it will stay where people can go to get to it, and they don't have to worry about the link breaking or whatever. So when it comes to online educational resources, one way you could use Twine is to actually include text-based games in your OER. Games are a great way to engage students with material. They're usually more interesting because they're interactive compared to traditional textbooks. Or you can think of this as like role-playing examples in your classes. There's some examples of educational interactive fiction games here. The two on the left are written in Twine. One of them is by me. And then on the right, there are three well-known examples which are not written in Twine, but which are still great examples of educational interactive fiction. If you are not interested in writing games and including them in your OERs, you could also use Twine to provide any kind of interactive HTML material. So if you have a mind map or like a hierarchy that you want to share with your students, you could use Twine to program that sort of click-through behavior. You could build quizzes and tests, which people could access without needing to be able to get into like a course management system like Canvas, for example, because all of the scoring and such could be done in the JavaScript or just in the Twine code itself. And there's an example here of a Twine file that someone created to describe different types of narrative choices in interactive fiction. So that's it for my presentation. If you're interested in learning more about interactive fiction, I'd encourage you to check out the resources on this page, or you could email me with any questions. And I'm also going to include, as part of this presentation, a Twine file that has some example code of things you could do.